Let's see, I think we're ready for Jeff, and I want to say a few words about Jeff before we bring him on. Jeff is the president and founder of American Promise. He's written a great book called, which is over here also, Corporations Are Not People, Reclaiming Democracy from Big Money and Global Corporations, which is right up our alley. He was an assistant attorney general and chief of the Public Law Enforcement Bureau at the Attorney General's office in Massachusetts for a number of years. And he was also the co-founder of Free Speech for People. But I find Jeff to be, or what I find in most dear to my heart, is his dedication to this cause over the years. Regardless of what position he's been in, he's always been fighting for the people. He's always been fighting for what's right for this country. So without further ado, Jeff.
Thank you, Bruce. Very generous, and thanks to all of you. Thanks to Shwari for making this happen. You know, I actually don't have a lot of formal remarks. My wife Nancy is in the back, and Nancy. We were coming through the Midwest on something I'll share with you in a few minutes. A project we're running called Writing the 28th Amendment. And so we were in St. Louis and Columbus and Cincinnati. And I had to be in San Francisco for the Bay Area Book Festival. I'm on a program with Robert Reich on Saturday. And so I had these and I had to be in Wyoming. And so Nancy's an artist, and I said, well, why don't we go to Santa Fe for a couple days? She hasn't been here before, and for an artist not to come to Santa Fe, right? So I called Ashwari and Bruce, and with no notice, you know, you guys fill a room with really great people, you know, Common Cause and Fix It America and the Majority Leader of the Senate, and, you know, it's fantastic. So thank you very much. It's an honor. If I'd known it was going to be this, I would have prepared some remarks. So, but I did prepare. LaFonda. So what I want to do is first thank you all, because that's really, you know, it's not going to be me, it's not going to be Shwari or Bruce or even the Majority Leader of the Senate. It's going to be Americans who come together to do really hard work to make self-government effective again, make people represented equally rather than, you know, money deciding whether you have influence or not in the political system. It's kind of, that's why we call it American Promise. It's not a promise we get, it's a promise we have an obligation to deliver. And I think it's people like you who are delivering this all over the country. So I want to just share a little bit of what I've seen with you, and then what we can do as you are here working in New Mexico, what they're doing in Wyoming and Missouri and all over the country, because I'm privileged to be able to do this. It really gives me a window into Americans in all these different places where we're supposed to be so divided and hopeless, and it just isn't true. The real story of America right now is rooms are filling up like this all over the country, people really determined to, you know, save the country, literally. So I'll share a little bit, but before I do, let me thank Vicki Harrison, especially in Common Cause. I was first here. I did a brief in the Citizens United case not long after I left the Attorney General's office to return to private practice. Can I just do a check-in? Does everybody know what the Citizens United case is? No. So for those who don't, and that's fine too. You know, we've really learned to don't talk about, you know, overturn Citizens United. That's not. If you know what that means, you want to overturn it. Otherwise, you're confused. Like, what's wrong with Citizens United, right? That's what we should be. So it's perfectly fine, and I try not to use that shorthand very much. But just a refresher, it's the Supreme Court case in 2010 that struck down the McCain-Feingold law, the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. And why it was so devastating is it didn't just do it in a narrow kind of way that it could have. It just did a sledgehammer to a whole bunch of principles, like you know, a definition of corruption, that we're allowed to have campaign finance laws because otherwise there's an undue risk of corruption. Well, they just said, no, there isn't. You know, let the money come in, and we're not allowed to have campaign finance laws in order to address systemic corruption. Literally, we're not. We can't do that now. Political equality, the idea that we're equal citizens, so therefore we should be able to be a little careful about the influence of money in politics because it could erode our ability to be equal citizens and represented fairly in a system. Supreme Court and Citizens United said no, that's not a justified reason for campaign finance laws. So they just blew away a whole bunch of principles that this country had held for literally over a century and struck down federal campaign finance laws and then went to work on the state campaign finance laws. Well over 20 states had prohibited corporations and unions from spending money to influence the outcome of elections. All of those are struck down under this theory that money is free speech, corporations have the same rights as people in that regard, and therefore we the people aren't allowed to limit it to influence the outcome of elections. So that's the Citizens United decision. That's why we need to overturn it and get back a rule and move forward with a rule that says, you know what, we have to have some reasonable laws to ensure that the people are represented rather than money being represented. So I'll get a lot more into it, but the point was I filed a brief in the Citizens United case. Obviously, my side lost. And that's I'm a sore loser. That's why I'm so persistent. So the way we reverse the Supreme Court when it does catastrophically bad decisions, which it does sometimes, you know, Dred Scott and this, saying African Americans have no rights. I'm quoting the Supreme Court literally, that the white man is bound to respect. That's in our Supreme Court reporters when they ruled African Americans can never be citizens of America with rights. Overturned 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. The court ruled in a case called Minor versus Happersett, women have no right to vote, overturned with the 19th Amendment. The court regularly does things that the country can't live with, and the amendment process is how we respond. So that's all by way of saying, shortly after that, when we started up with this idea that, well, we can't just have the court have the last word, let's do what Americans have done before. Let's start a constitutional amendment campaign. And we'll take it to the people, we'll let the people decide, should we be able to have reasonable limits on spending of money in politics? Do corporations and unions have an unlimited right to influence our election process? And we had confidence that Americans will actually say, no, we got to fix that. And that's been true. So not long after that, I came to New Mexico for the first time. And I met Vicki Harrison of Common Cause. And Common Cause has been a wonderful partner in this work from the very beginning. You know, we won a ballot initiative together in Montana, 75% to 25% vote back in 2012, the same day Mitt Romney won Montana by 10 points at least over Barack Obama. 75% of those very same voters said, we want a constitutional amendment that says we the people have a right to have reasonable campaign finance laws and corporations don't have the same rights as people. We instruct our legislators to get that done. Here we are 6 years later, and they're not quite there yet, but we're working on that too. And I'm going to share amazing progress since then. But that same year, 2012, I came to New Mexico and met Vicki, and I didn't know this at the time. She had just started at Common Cause, New Mexico. But she didn't waste any time. Within a few months, New Mexico became the second state in the country to formally enact a resolution calling for this 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. So it was wonderful, thank you, and it's still wonderful to partner with you on this work here in New Mexico and around the country. And so here we are back 5 years later, and of course we don't have the 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution yet, so we're all still working on it. And enter Steve Lipscomb, who I only have met this past year, but it's been wonderful. It feels like we've known each other a long time. And as you may know, he's got an organization that he leads, and an idea even bigger than an organization. Ideas are the most powerful thing in the world, and it's called Fix It America. And it's a constitutional amendment proposal, like the other ones, that would allow us to get a handle on the influence of money in our election system, so we actually have effective self-government again. And then it goes further and says what I think in this past 5 years Americans have really come to recognize, that partisan gerrymandering is wrong. You know, partisan gerrymandering is slicing us apart. It's making us unable to govern ourselves. It's making many people unrepresented because you're in a district where you're not actually you're either, you know, a fringe, extreme person, so you've been put in that district to be with the other ones like you to deliver that district for that particular party, or you don't have representation at all because it's always going to go that way. And so the idea that we ought to have districts drawn on lines that aren't about partisan outcomes but are about actually representation of the people is something I think that has become so clear. We need that as much as we need, you know, a handle on money in politics. And both of those have in common what's so interesting about that. So I'll just say thank you, Steve. And New Mexico, thank you, I suppose, the majority leader of the Senate, and all of you and many other people in New Mexico, you have said once again, you know, we said it before, we'll say it again. We want the 28th Amendment to the United States Constitution. And just a few months ago, you passed the resolution, the Fix It America Amendment resolution, the first state in the country to do that. And there's going to be many more, and we're going to be, in New Mexico. We're looking forward to working with all of you and to Steve across the country and Common Cause across the country to carry this work. So,
Jeff?
Yes.
I actually have copies of these memorials and things that he's talking about if you want to look at the actual language.
Great. Thanks, Ashwari. So let me just say a few things. So you might, let me just do another check-in. So we've been talking about a constitutional amendment. Maybe it's obvious, I know it is to many people who've been working on it, but if you're new to this, which is fine, this is what American Promise is about, is how do we bring millions of Americans into this work that they know something's gone wrong, they know we need a big solution rather than little solutions, but they're not quite sure how did we get into this mess and how do we get out. So the constitutional amendment, the reason we need it is the Supreme Court has interpreted our Constitution to mean something that it doesn't. It's interpreted the First Amendment to say money is free speech, therefore we can't have reasonable limits on that in the political process. It's interpreted the Constitution essentially to deny what most Americans think we can't deny, which is the American promise, that we're all created equal, and we may not be equals in the economic sphere, we may not be equals in all kinds of material or physical or other ways, but the fundamental American proposition is that we're created equal as citizens, and when you're in a city council meeting or you're voting for Congress or whatever you're doing as a citizen, you have the same right as anybody else, no matter how much money they may have, how little you have. That's like core American political theory. That's what this whole game's about. It's, if that goes down, we're done, right? That proposition is what the revolution was about. And the Supreme Court denies that, literally. They will, if I went into the Supreme Court and I said we argued, if I tried to defend New Mexico campaign finance laws, saying that we need to have limits, reasonable limits, a level playing field. The phrase level playing field, most Americans will say, oh yes, we need that. The Supreme Court, if they hear that word, level playing field, unconstitutional. Absolutely. That's what they did in Arizona. The Arizona Free Enterprise Pact case. They said, it looks like you're trying to level the playing field. And the lawyers, of course, said, oh, no, even though they wanted to say yes. Damn right we're trying to level the playing field. But if you say you're trying to level the playing field, you lose in this Supreme Court. Because they say political equality is not something that is worth campaign finance laws. You can't do it. So there's no way for the state legislature or Congress to just legislate around that. The Supreme Court will strike it down. The only way to fix that is either a new Supreme Court, a different set of justices, like Brown versus Board of Education. It took almost 100 years, but eventually the Supreme Court recognized its mistake in Plessy versus Ferguson. So a Supreme Court can fix it, or a constitutional amendment can fix it. And we are down to the constitutional amendment. This Supreme Court will not fix this problem. They will not fix it, I can assure you. That the new Supreme Court justice is of the same mind as the other five. It's a 5-4 court on this issue. So it's up to us. So that's why we talk about this constitutional amendment. So then, what do we do to win it? Well, I'll pick on Nancy again. In 2014, the new edition of the book came out, product placement here. The new edition of the book came out, which is for sale wherever books are sold. And I'm kidding, all the proceeds go to the cause. So the new book came out, so our youngest had gone off to school. We had an empty nest. I crazily left my law practice behind and decided we're going all in on this. And we loaded up the car with books and we went all around the country doing a book tour. And what I found was rooms like this, groups like New Mexico Money Out of Politics, everywhere, but they weren't connected with each other. They weren't unified to move forward on strategy. They didn't realize or have the feedback loops that you get if you're really connected on this amendment strategy with, okay, what's the roadmap? How do we get there? Where are we now? What do we do next? So, and I've been working on, this isn't a criticism of anybody, there's great organizations like Common Cause and Public Citizen and the group I was with at the time, Free Speech for People. We'd all been doing this, but I realized, what if we really wanted to win? What would we need? You know, how are we going to bring this over the finish line? A constitutional amendment, you need 2/3 of Congress to propose the amendment. That's 67 senators, 290 members of the House. It then has to be ratified in 3/4 of the states. That's 38 states. So we're all pushing and pushing, but we don't know, like, if we're not connected well enough, we're not creating the feedback loops to keep getting more people pushing in the same place. So we win, like in Montana, 75%, 25%. I came back in 2014 to Helena and Missoula, and there was like insufficient energy, let's say. 75% of the voters had instructed their members of Congress to get this done. And, you know, Senator Tester was awesome. He said, yes, he introduced an amendment, move forward. But otherwise, there wasn't a whole lot of, you know, accountability for members of Congress ignoring it. And so we started thinking about, my co-founder comes out of the business world, helped build Staples and then several other businesses. And he thinks in systems theory, say, well, if we want to win, we got to have the feedback loops, we got to do a whole bunch of things. We have to empower people to do it ourselves where we live, and not try to direct everything from sort of top down. We had to get a cross-partisan place to come together to do this work, even if we're disagreeing. We didn't have to agree on a lot of things, and you had to have somewhere to go to do this work with people who you don't agree with on political issues. We had to have a strategy, being in all the right states at the right time to get to 290 votes in the House, 67 in the Senate. So lots of things, and thus American Promise was born 2 years ago, January 1, 2016. And it's been phenomenal, the response, I think. And some of you have been there from the beginning. Bruce and Shwari and others, almost from the very beginning, were involved in this, as were people all over the country. We now have 250,000 people in 50 states. We have an advisory council that's modeling that cross-partisan work. So I was up in Wyoming, as I said, with, and Senator Al Simpson, the former Republican senator there. He's side by side with Mike Dukakis, our governor from Massachusetts, who ran for president on the Democratic side. We have Nina Turner, you know, Bernie Sanders, president of Our Revolution, former Ohio State senator there, John Pudner of Take Back Our Republic, an Alabama conservative. So we really have succeeded mainly because of discipline and focus and hard work to just be respectful of each other across these different partisan lines and remember that we're working for this same goal and not let us get pulled down these different directions. So this can really work, and it won't work just because, oh, American Promise does this. It'll be because we are able to work with anyone in any state, anywhere, to get this done, and that's the big strength. And that's not to just sort of brag about American Promise. There's certain things you have to do, like you know, focus on this amendment to the exclusion of a lot of other things that might be more divisive, but also very important. So this isn't to say, you know, those other fights aren't worth having, or that politics doesn't matter. Partisan fighting, there's real issues at stake, and I'm not denying those, but it's to have that discipline and that focus. And so the other couple of other pieces we needed is, you know, there's a lot of different amendment proposals. The wording actually matters a lot, right? When you think of a constitutional amendment, it's really important, and what it actually says, and there are different views on that, naturally. This being America, free people have different views and different ideas, and you push for what you believe in, and that's good. But there are, you know, at one point, 13 different constitutional amendment proposals just to fix this problem we all are trying to fix. I hope we're all trying to fix it. If you're not, ask your questions too. We can have a discussion about that. That's fine. Everybody's welcome at the conversation. But assuming we're all trying to fix this, we have to get at the right time. I think we have about 18 months if we're going to stay on our schedule, which is to get this amendment done soon. But we got to get behind one amendment. And so the idea isn't for American Promise to come in and say, hey, we have it, we got the one amendment. It's to say there are some great ideas. I mean, this country is filled with creative, determined people. The Fix It America amendment's awesome. The subcommittee of this group, New Mexico Money Out of Politics, and John House has done so much work on this, have created a really interesting amendment that actually builds in some of the campaign finance reforms that we need. Senator Tom Udall, your senator, has introduced the Democracy for All amendment, which has the most support in Congress right now, 44 senators, 170 on the House companion bill, 170 members of the House behind that. It would be transformative in a lot of ways. These are all really good amendments. And they're not, it's not to say one over the other right now. It's to say, how do we get the best one we can get for our generation to build the foundation for this country for future generations. So we're doing something at American Promise called Writing the 28th Amendment, which says, look, this is the first amendment in the digital age. Every American can be at the table. Every American can offer ideas, and that's what we're doing. We have thousands and thousands of people who've weighed in. The St. Louis program we did, 200 people, constitutional scholars, different ideas, essentially open mic, deliberation. We've got a working group of citizen leaders, as we call all of us, including me, who are volunteers in this effort, with constitutional lawyers, with judges, with members of Congress. But it's not done by their secret committee or something. The idea is they serve all Americans. Now let's take it on the road. So St. Louis, Columbus, Cincinnati, we're going to go to Washington, Atlanta, all over the country with this, so all Americans can be heard. But then we're going to have to unify and get behind the best language after getting all that input with the most effective, powerful amendment we can. So where are we now, 5 years after New Mexico was the second state to do this? Far more along than you would guess from the media or any other. So I already mentioned 44 senators. We need 67 senators. That's a lift. But we already have 44. And the only reason we have 44 is because of the hard work in the states. We now have 19 states that have formally passed resolutions. 4 of those have been by ballot initiative. The 75% support level is common when cities and towns vote on this. 800 cities and towns have formally passed resolutions calling for this amendment, telling Congress to get this done, saying we are ready to ratify this 28th Amendment. 9 more communities in Wisconsin did it 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, the Tuesday of the Wisconsin elections. And 9 of these communities, they're red communities, blue communities, so-called, they're in conservative parts of Wisconsin, more progressive parts of Wisconsin. Average passage was 81%. The lowest was 77% in what I'm told is a very conservative county, St. Croix County. Janesville, Wisconsin, Paul Ryan's hometown, House Speaker Paul Ryan, 84% support for this amendment. So those kind of numbers literally are true wherever we go. It doesn't matter if it's conservative, progressive. Americans really want to get this done. We're ready to do it. And the trick is now, okay, how do we take all of that 84%, the 19 states, the 800 cities and towns, and make Congress do it? So that's what we're doing now. And we have a pledge campaign. And thank you, Jarrett, our candidate right here, who has signed the pledge, the American Promise Pledge. And you're running for House District?
In the District 50 in our state legislature.
District 50. So close to 200 candidates, independents, Republicans, Democrats, including Jarrett, have taken the pledge to support this amendment in every way they can if elected. And we celebrate that, again, whether it's a Republican, Democrat, Independent. We want all to take the pledge, or for voters to know Yes.
Just a quick question, do you post that?
Yes.
On your site?
Yes,
I
American.
hadn't noticed it before, but that's
Yeah,
great. I was
American
being
Promise.
so nonpartisan, you wouldn't
Yeah, no, we
give
well.
attention to the people who have signed it.
Yeah, no, we are nonpartisan. We are cross-partisan, actually, we
Good.
like to say,
That's
because
better.
we want to bring. You can be partisan, come together and help get this work done, and don't be partisan while you're doing this work, because we got to stick together to win this. But so yeah, if you go to AmericanPromise.net.
No, I've been there for
And
some reason. I
under
just
take
missed it.
under take action, I think it's called. Look for the pledge,
Okay.
and we update it weekly, and it lists all of them.
Great.
And that was one of the other things we knew we had to do is get to be a C4, so be able to do citizen lobby, to be able to say, you know, candidates take the pledge, to be able to inform voters. These candidates have taken the pledge. These candidates haven't. Now we don't get involved in the elections or say who to vote for or do anything like that, but we are about information that Americans should have when they vote this November. That's how we're going to get to 67 senators. That's how we're going to get to 290 House members. That's how we're going to get ratification in 38 states. So, so thank you, Jared. Are there any other candidates in the room? I do want to just recognize some of the hardest stuff to do. It's hard enough to be a citizen, but to throw your hat into the ring and run or serve as our city councilor and Senate Majority Leader, the Worth family are doing. You know, we thank you, and it's true for anyone who throws their hat into the ring and runs and serves. So that's the pledge campaign. 2018 matters. We think we'll be much further along in Congress after 2018. We think we'll be much, and I mean on this amendment. I'm not talking about any party. And after 2020, we're going to be ready to vote. We want this amendment out of Congress by 2021, back to the states that are now ready to ratify, because we're all doing this state work too. And we think we're there. We think we can do that. Now, I want to just sort of address one thing. Just a lot of things, but one more thing. And just bear with me. So, you may well ask, how are we going to get, you know, or you may ask, how many of those 44 senators are Republicans? Or how are we going to get the parties, when they can't agree on when to go to lunch, to agree on a constitutional amendment? So we are looking at it just like every other issue, like how do we get one amendment, not 13? We are looking at every problem, obstacle, squarely in the eye, and so we're not afraid to talk about it. 84% of the Janesville, Wisconsin might want this. Their son, who's son of Janesville, House Speaker Paul Ryan, has never done anything to help this amendment. So how do we change that dynamic? Well, with Steve Lipscomb's Fix It America and Take Back Our Republic, I mentioned John Pudner, a conservative campaign finance reform organization, and American Promise. We issued this report last week called Government of Citizens, Not Money. And it identifies, it first describes this deeply cross-partisan support in the country for this work. And then it describes more than 200 Republican legislative members in the states, including some in New Mexico, who have actually voted to support this constitutional amendment. And we're kind of using this to take all this cross-partisan energy, this, look, Americans are ready to do this, like go to the moon kind of reform. And the media and the political class might tell us, oh, we're too divided, we can't do anything. We want to combat that impression and say, no, look at this. We are unified on this. So, you know, that's a big thing that we are going to, you know, reports don't get amendments, but information matters. And we got to stop this notion that, oh, somehow only the left cares about this. It's not true, as we know from the numbers. And now we're encouraging and creating the space and the place where Republicans can step up and say, yeah, I may not agree with Bernie Sanders or Barack Obama but on a lot of things, but we agree on this. And so we lift up and highlight the people who are doing it, like I mentioned, Al Simpson. And next week we'll announce that, so you're getting a sneak preview here, that the former senator from Maine, Olympia Snowe, is joining our advisory council and coming on board. Yeah, and that matters a lot, because she, as Al Simpson told me up in Cody, wow, that's amazing, because she really thinks carefully, does not make a move until she sees, like, how is this going to get through and get done. Then she will lend her weight and her effort behind it if she really has, you know, kicked the tires. And I can tell you, it took a long time to kind of get her comfortable with this, but she is there, and she's coming on our advisory council. And so we think, especially if we can make this an issue with the pledge and all the other work we can do to show that, look, every candidate needs to say where they stand on this amendment. Are you going to stand with government of the donors or government of the people? We'll get enough Republicans. We don't need them all, but we know a lot of Republicans. We know tons of Republicans in the country agree with us, and we know that we can get members of Congress to do so too. So this is real. It's closer than we can imagine, and I think if we just double down on this and all the other reforms that you're working on, and the ones Bruce mentioned, because we need those too, because remember, we got to have a healthy political system in the states to win ratification too. So all the kinds of reforms, from disclosure and financing of election reforms and all the things you can do short of an amendment really matter too. But we are going to help win this amendment, and then it's changed forever, right? Because then we are basically renewing the promise, just like after the Civil War, just like we've done over and over again. I found out it wasn't quite so that Winston Churchill said it, but it's so good that I want to pretend it is. So as Winston Churchill said, Americans always do the right thing after exhausting all the other possibilities. I only found out recently, it might have been someone before him, but as Abraham Lincoln said, don't believe everything you read on the internet. But it's really true if you think about it. I said Americans, that we've overturned the Supreme Court decisions that have gone the other way on big things like, are we equal based on race? Are we equal based on gender? Should 18, 19, 20-year-olds be able to be taken from their homes, sent to foreign wars, but not have a right to vote? Should we allow a poll tax that has an economic barrier and a racial barrier to voting? All of those, the Supreme Court said, yeah, let's do all those things. Let's be unequal on race. Let's be unequal on gender. Let's be, 18, 19, 20-year-olds, no right to vote, even if they're drafted into the armed services. Poll tax, no problem. Supreme Court decided all those things the other way, and Americans did the hard work that we're doing today to fix it and ground ourselves back in those basic, simple promises that mean so much for the country about what the country's all about. So that's why I know we'll do it again. And if you're getting down, like it feels like the country's falling apart or the democracy isn't working anymore, I hate to tell you, but that's the sign that it's going to happen. Because if you think about when do we do amendments? Well, the Bill of Rights, in the midst of revolution and the failure of the Confederation before we got the new Constitution, and then we got 10 more amendments in the Bill of Rights. The next big batch was after the Civil War, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, to renew our promise, rightly called a new birth of freedom. It was a new recommitment to the basic American promise. But it wasn't all a long time ago. Between 1913 and 1920, and if you think back or read some of the history, Doris Kearns Goodwin is on our advisory council. She's a historian of each of these periods. Things were falling apart. There was terrorism, literally. There was World War. There was a an influenza epidemic that killed millions around the globe, and a lot of Americans. There were immigration stresses, like we have today. Huge amounts of immigration making the country divided and torn. There was racism. It felt, if you lived then, like things were really falling apart. And they did 4 amendments in the space of 10 years, 4 constitutional amendments. And they're big, women voting. We elect senators because of those amendments. A progressive income tax was struck down by the Supreme Court, a federal income tax, overturned with a constitutional amendment. We won't get into prohibition. That was it. So, and then the next one in the 60s, cities burning, another foreign war. The president driven from office in a corruption scandal in Watergate. And we forget, we did 4 amendments between 1963 and 1971. Constitutional amendments, right? So that's in our lifetime for some of us.
Can you speak briefly to the effort to bring about an amendment via a call for an article?
Yeah, I will, for the convention issue. So yeah, I'm just wrapping up.
Okay.
So I'm almost there. I'm already up to the 60s. Just give me a
Well, that includes history.
So my point is that we do amendments when everything's falling apart. And if it feels like everything's falling apart now, It's time. It's right, and it is falling apart because we drift, like in our personal lives. You know, you can drift away from your best self, and Americans we get distracted and we do all these things, and we kind of drift away from basic principles that we have to pin down into the Constitution again and renew it for another generation or two. So this is our time, and it is working. We have a winning strategy. We have an amazing opportunity here to make a big, huge historical win. So that's what we're going to do. Let me stop there and just say thank you again for having me here, having me and Nancy here. We're so glad to be with you, for all the great work you do, and let's make some history together, okay? And then we'll ask all kinds of questions.